Hello, my friends, it's Indiana Holmes, and we continue tonight with our new book, The Three Musketeers. And we begin with Chapter 2, The Antechamber of M. de Treville. M. de Trollsville, as his family was still called in Gascony, or M. de Treville, as he ended by styling himself in Paris, had really commenced life as D'Artagnan now did, that is to say, without a sou in his pocket, but with a fund of audacity, shrewdness, and intelligence, which makes the poorest Gascon gentleman often derive more in his hope from the paternal inheritance than the richest Perigordian or Berrichan gentleman derives in reality from his. His insolent bravery, his still more insolent success, at a time when blows poured down like hail, had borne him to the top of that difficult ladder called court favor, which he had climbed 4 steps at a time. He was the friend of the king, who honored highly, as everyone knows, the memory of his father, Henry IV. The father of M. de Treville had served him so faithfully in his wars against the League that in default of money, a thing to which the Béarnais was accustomed all his life, and who constantly paid his debts with that of which he never stood in need of borrowing, that is to say, with ready wit in default of money, we repent, or I should say we repeat. He authorized him, after the reduction of Paris, to assume his arms a golden lion passant upon gules, with the motto Fidelis et Fortis. This was a great matter in the way of honor, but very little in the way of wealth, so that when the illustrious companion of the great Henry died, the only inheritance he was able to leave his son was his sword and his motto. Thanks to this double gift, and the spotless name that accompanied it, M. de Treville was admitted into the household of the young prince, where he made such good use of his sword, and was so faithful to his motto, that Louis XIII, one of the good blades of his kingdom, was accustomed to say that if he had a friend who was about to fight, he would advise him to choose as a second himself first, and Treville next, or even perhaps before himself. Thus, Louis XIII had a real liking for Treville, a royal liking, a self-interested liking. It is true, but still a liking. At that unhappy period, it was an important consideration to be surrounded by such men as Treville. Many might take for their device the epithet strong, which formed the second part of his motto, but very few gentlemen could lay claim to the faithful, which constituted the first. Treville was one of these latter. His was one of those rare organizations endowed with an obedient intelligence like that of a dog, with a blind valor, a quick eye, and a prompt hand, to whom sight appeared only to be given to see if the king were dissatisfied with anyone, and the hand to strike this displeasing personage, whether a Besame, a Morvier, a Poletoit de Mer, or a Vitry. In short, up to this period, nothing had been wanting to Treville but opportunity. But he was ever at the watch for it, and he faithfully promised himself that he would not fail to seize it by its 3 hairs whenever it came within reach of his hand. At last, Louis XIII made Treville the captain of his Musketeers, who were to Louis XIII in devotedness, or rather phantasmus, what his ordinaires had been to Henry III, and his Scotch Guard to Louis VI. On his part, the cardinal was not behind the king in this respect. When he saw the formidable and chosen body with Louis XIII had surrounded himself, this second, or rather this first king of France, became desirous that he, too, should have his guard. He had his Musketeers, therefore, as Louis XIII had his, and these two powerful rivals vied with each other over the other in procuring not only from all the provinces of France, but even from all foreign states, the most celebrated swordsmen. It was not uncommon for Richelieu and Louis XIII to dispute over their evening game of chess upon the merits of their servants. Each boasted the bearing and the courage of his own people, while exclaiming loudly against duels and brawls. They excited them secretly to quarrel, deriving an immoderate satisfaction or genuine regret from the success or defeat of their own combatants. We learn this from the memoirs of the man who was concerned in some few of these defeats and in many of these victories. Treville had grasped the weak side of his master, and it was to this address that he owed the long and constant favor of a king who has not left the reputation behind him of being very faithful in his friendships. He paraded his musketeers before the Cardinal Armand Duplessis with an insolent air which made the gray mustache of his eminence curl with ire. Treville understood admirably the war method of the period, in which he who could not live at the expense of the enemy must live at the expense of his compatriots. His soldiers formed a legion of devil-may-care fellows, perfectly undisciplined toward all but himself. Loose, half-drunk, imposing, the king's musketeers, or rather M. de Treville's, spread themselves about in the cabarets, in the public walks, and in the public sports, shouting, twisting their mustaches, clanking their swords, and taking great pleasure in annoying the guards of the cardinal whenever they could fall in with them, then drawing in open streets, as if it were best the all possible sports, sometimes killed, but sure in that case to be both wept and avenged, often killing others, but then certain of not rotting in prison, M. de Treville being there to claim them. Thus M. Treville was praised to the highest note by these men, who adored him, and who, ruffians as they were, trembled before him like scholars before their master, obedient to his last word, and ready to sacrifice themselves to wash out the smallest insult. M. de Treville employed this powerful weapon for the king in the first place, and the friends of the king, and then for himself and his own friends. For the rest, in the memoirs of this period, which has left so many memoirs, one does not find this worthy gentleman blamed even by his enemies, and he had many such among the men of the pen as well as among the men of the sword. In no instance, let us say, was this worthy gentleman accused of deriving personal advantage from the cooperation of his minions. Endowed with a rare genius for intrigue, which rendered him the equal of the ablest intriguers, he remained an honest man. Still further, in spite of the sword thrusts which weaken, and painful exercises which fatigue, he had become one of the most gallant frequenters of revels, one of the most insinuating ladies' men, one of the softest whisperers of interesting nothings of his day. The bonnes fortunes of de Treville were talked of as those of M. de Bassompierre, and had been talked of 20 years before, and that was not saying a little. The captain of the Musketeers was therefore admired, feared, and loved, and this constitutes the zenith of human fortune. Louis XIV absorbed all the smaller stars of his court in his own vast radiance, but his father, a son pluribus impar, left his personal splendor to each of his favorites, his individual value to each of his courtiers. In addition to the levies of the king and the cardinal, there might be reckoned in Paris at that time more than 200 smaller but still noteworthy levies. Among these 200 levies, that of Treville was one of the most sought. The court of his hotel, situated in the Rue de Verreau-Colombière, resembled a camp from by 6 o'clock in the morning in the summer and 8 o'clock in the winter, from 50 to 60 musketeers who appeared to replace one another in order, always present in imposing number, paraded constantly, armed to the teeth and ready for anything. On one of those immense staircases, upon whose space modern civilization would build a whole house, ascended and descended the office-seekers of Paris, who ran after any sort of favor, gentlemen from the provinces anxious to be enrolled, the servants in all sorts of liveries, bringing and carrying messages between their master and M. de Treville. In the antechamber, upon long circular benches, reposed the elect, that is to say, those who were called. In this apartment a continued buzzing prevailed from morning till night, while M. de Treville, in his office contiguous in this antechamber, received visits, listened to complaints, gave his orders, and, like the king in his balcony at the Louvre, had only to place himself at the window to review both his men and arms. The day on which D'Artagnan presented himself, the assemblage was imposing, particularly for a provincial just arriving from his province. It is true that this provincial was a Gascon, and that, particularly at this period, the compatriots of D'Artagnan had the reputation of not being easily intimidated. When he had passed the massive door, covered with long square-headed nails, he fell into the midst of a troop of swordsmen who crossed one another in their passage, calling out, quarreling, and playing tricks one with another, in order to make one's way amid the turbulent and conflicting waves. It was necessary to be an officer, a great noble, or a pretty woman. It was then into the midst of this tumult and disorder that our young man advanced with a beating heart, ranging his long rapier up his lanky leg, and keeping one hand on the edge of his cap, with that half-smile of the embarrassed provincial who wishes to put on a good face. When he had passed one group, he began to breathe more freely, but he could not have helped observing that they turned round to look at him, and for the first time in his life, D'Artagnan, who had till that day entertained a very good opinion of himself, felt ridiculous. Arrived at the staircase, it was still worse. There were 4 musketeers on the bottom steps, amusing themselves with the following exercise, while 10 or 12 of their comrades waited upon the landing place to take their turn in the sport. One of them, stationed upon this top stair, naked sword in hand, prevented, or at least endeavored to prevent, the 3 others from ascending. These 3 others fenced against him with their agile swords. D'Artagnan at first took these weapons for foils, and believed them to be buttoned, but he soon perceived by certain scratches that every weapon was pointed and sharpened, and that each of these scratches, not only the spectators, but even the actors themselves, laughed like so many madmen. He, who at the moment occupied the upper step, kept his adversaries marvelously in check. A circle was formed around them. The conditions required that at every hit the man touched should quit the game, yielding his turn for the benefit of the adversary who had hit him. In 5 minutes, 3 were slightly wounded, 1 on the hand, another on the ear, by the defender of the stair, who himself remained intact, a piece of skill which was worth to him, according to the rules agreed upon, 3 turns of favor. However difficult it might be, or rather as he pretended it was, to astonish our younger traveler, This pastime really astonished him. He had seen in his province, that land in which heads become so easily heated, a few of the preliminaries of duels, but the daring of these four fencers appeared to him the strongest he had ever seen, even in Gascony. He believed himself transported into that famous country of giants into which Gulliver afterward went, and was so frightened, and yet he had not gained the goal, for there were still the landing place and the antechamber. On the landing there were no longer fighting, but amused themselves with stories about women, and in the antechamber with stories about the court. On the landing D'Artagnan blushed. In the antechamber he trembled. His warm and fickle imagination, which was in Gascony, had rendered him formidable to young chambermaids, and even sometimes their mistresses, had never dreamed, even in moments of delirium, of half of the amorous wonders, or a quarter of the feats of gallantry, which were here set forth in connection with names the best known, and with details the least concealed. But if his morals were shocked on the landing, his respect for the cardinal was scandalized in the antechamber. There, to his great astonishment, D'Artagnan heard the policy which made all Europe tremble criticized aloud and openly, as well as the private life of the cardinal, which so many great nobles had been punished for trying to pry into. The great man, whom was so revered by D'Artagnan, the elder, served as an object of ridicule to the Musketeers of Treville, who cracked their jokes upon his bandy legs and his crooked back. Some sang ballads about Madame d'Aiguillon, his mistress, and Madame Chamblette, his niece, while others formed parties and plans to annoy the pages and guards of the Cardinal Duke, all things which appeared to D'Artagnan monstrous impossibilities. Nevertheless, when the name of the king was now and then uttered unthinkably and unkingly amid all these cardinal jests, a sort of gag seemed to close for a moment on all these jeering mouths. They looked hesitatingly around them, and appeared to doubt the thickness of the partition between them and the office of M. de Treville. But a fresh allusion soon brought back the conversation to his eminence, and then the laughter recovered its loudness, and the light was not withheld from any of his actions. Certes, these fellows will all either be imprisoned or hanged, thought the terrified D'Artagnan, and I no doubt with them, for from the moment I have either listened or heard of them, I shall be held as an accomplice. What would my good father say, who so strongly pointed to me the respect due to the cardinal, if he knew I was in a society of such pagans? We have no need, therefore, to say that D'Artagnan dared not to join in on the conversation. He only looked with his eyes and listened with all his ears, stretching his five senses so to lose nothing, and despite his confidence on the paternal admonitions, he felt himself carried by his tastes and led by his instincts to praise rather than to blame the unheard-of things which were taking place. Although he was a perfect stranger in the court of M. de Treville courtiers, and this his first appearance in that place, he was at length noticed, and somebody came and asked him what he wanted. At this demand, D'Artagnan gave his name very modestly, emphasized the title of compatriot, and begged the servant who had put the question to him to request a moment's audience with M. de Treville, a request which the other, with an air of protection, promised to transmit in due season. D'Artagnan, a little recovered from his first surprise, had now leisure to study costumes and physiognomy. The center of the most animated group was a musketeer of great height and haughty countenance, dressed in a costume so peculiar as to attract general attention. He did not wear the uniform cloak, which was not obligatory at that epoch of less liberty, but more independence, but a cerulean blue doublet, a little faded and worn, and over this magnificent baldric, worked in gold, which shone like water ripples in the sun. A long cloak of crimson velvet fell in graceful folds from his shoulders, disclosing in front of the splendid baldric, from which was suspended a gigantic rapier. This musketeer had just come off guard, complained of having a cold, and coughed from time to time affectedly. It was for this reason, as he said to those around him, that he had to put on his cloak, and while he spoke with a lofty air and twisted his mustache disdainfully, all admired his embroidered baldric, and D'Artagnan more than anyone. "What would you have?" said the musketeer. "This fashion is coming in. It is a folly, I had to admit, but it is the fashion besides. One must lay out one's inheritance somehow." "Ah, Porthos," cried one of his companions, "don't try to make us believe you obtained that baldric by paternal generosity. It was given to you by that veiled lady I met with you the other day near the gate of Saint Henri." "No, upon honor and by the faith of a gentleman, I bought it with the contents of my own purse," answered he whom they designated by the name Porthos. "Yes, about the same manner," said another musketeer, "that I bought this new purse with what my mistress put into the old one." "It's true, though," said Porthos, "and the proof is that I paid 12 pistoles for it." The wonder was increased, though the doubt continued to exist. "It is not true, Aramis," said Porthos, turning toward another musketeer. This other musketeer formed a perfect contrast to his interrogator, who had just designated him by the name of Aramis. He was a stout man of about 22 or 23, with an open, ingenuous countenance, a black, mild eye, and cheeks rosy and downy as an autumn peach. His delicate mustache marked a perfectly straight line up his upper lip. He appeared to dread to lower his hands, lest their veins should swell, and he pinched the tips of his ears from time to time to preserve their delicate pink transparency. Habitually, he spoke little and slowly, bowed frequently, laughed without noise, showing his teeth, which were fine, and of which, as the rest of his person, he appeared to take great care. He answered the appeal of his friend by an affirmative nod of the head. This affirmation appeared to dispel all doubts with regard to the baldric. They continued to admire it, but said no more about it, and with a rapid change of thought, the conversation passed suddenly to another subject. "What do you think of the story of Chalice, Esquire relates?" asked another musketeer, without addressing anyone in particular, but on the contrary speaking to everybody. "And what does he say?" asked Porthos, in a self-sufficient tone. "He relates that he met at Brussels Rochefort and the ame dame of the cardinal disguised as Capuchin, and that this cursed Rochefort, thanks to his disguise, had tricked M. de Laguise like a ninny, as he is." "A ninny indeed," said Porthos, "but in the matter certain?" "I had it from Aramis," replied the musketeer. "Indeed." "Why, you knew it, Porthos," said Aramis. "I told you of it yesterday. Let us say no more about it." "Say no more about it? That's your opinion," replied Porthos. "Say no more about it? Peste! You come to your conclusions quickly. What? The cardinal sets a spy upon a gentleman? Has his letters stolen from him by means of a traitor? A brigand, a rascal has. With the help of this spy, and thanks to this correspondence, Chalais, throats cut, under the stupid pretext that he wanted to kill the king and marry Monsieur to the queen. Nobody knew a word of this enigma. You unraveled it yesterday, to the great satisfaction of all, and while we are still gaping with wonder at the news, you come and tell us today? Let us say no more about it. Well then, let us talk about it, since you desire it, replied Aramis patiently. This Rochefort, cried Porthos. If I were the esquire of poor Chalais, should pass a minute or two very uncomfortably with me, and you would pass rather a sad quarter hour with the Red Duke, replied Aramis. Oh, the Red Duke! Bravo, bravo, the Red Duke! Cried Porthos, clapping his hands and nodding his head. The Red Duke is capital. I'll circulate that saying, be assured, my dear fellow. Who says this Aramis is not a wit? What a misfortune is you did not follow your first vocation. What a delicious abbé you would have made. Oh, it's only a temporary postponement, replied Aramis. I shall be one some day. You very well know, Porthos, that I continue to study theology for that purpose. He will be one, as he says, cried Porthos. He will be one sooner or later. Sooner, said Aramis. He only waits for one thing, to determine him to resume his cassock, which hangs behind his uniform, said another musketeer. What is he waiting for? Asked another. Only till the queen has given an heir to the crown of France. No jesting upon that subject, gentlemen, said Porthos. Thank God the queen is still of an age to give one. They say that M. de Buckingham is in France, replied Aramis, with a significant smile, which gave to this sentence, apparently so simple, a tolerably scandalous meaning. Aramis, my good friend, this time you are wrong, interrupted Porthos. Your wit is always leading you beyond bounds. If M. de Treville heard you, you would repent of speaking thus. Are you going to give me a lesson, Porthos? Cried Aramis. From those usually mild eye, a flash passed like lightning. My dear fellow, be a musketeer or be an abbé. Be one or the other, but not both, replied Porthos. You know what Athos told you the other day. You eat at everybody's mess. Ah, don't be angry, I beg you. And that would be useless. You know what is agreed upon between you, Athos, and me. You go to Madame d'Aiguillon's, and you pay your court to her. You go to Madame de Bois Tracy's, the cousin of Madame de Treverieux's, and you pass for being far advanced in the good graces of that lady. Oh, good Lord, don't trouble yourself to reveal your good luck. No one asks for your secret. All the world knows your discretion. But since you possess that virtue, why the devil don't you make use of it with respect to her majesty? Let whoever likes to talk of the king and the cardinal, and how he likes but the queen, is sacred. And if anyone speaks of her, let it be respectfully. Porthos, you are as vain as Narcissus. I plainly tell you so, replied Aramis. You know I hate moralizing, except when it is done by Athos. As to you, good sir, you wear too magnificent a baldric to be strong on that head. I will be an abbé if it suits me. In the meanwhile, I am a musketeer. In that quality I say what I please, and at this moment it pleases me to say that you weary me. Aramis! Porthos! Gentlemen, gentlemen, cried the surrounding group. Monsieur de Treville awaits Monsieur d'Artagnan, cried a servant. throwing open the door of the cabinet. At this announcement, during which the door remained open, everyone became mute, and amid the general silence, the young man crossed part of the length of the antechamber and entered the apartment of the captain of the Musketeers, congratulating himself with all his heart at having so narrowly escaped the end of this strange quarrel. Chapter 3. The Audience. Monsieur de Tréville was at the moment in rather ill humor. Nevertheless, he saluted the young man politely, who bowed to the very ground, and he smiled on receiving D'Artagnan's response. The Béarnais accent, which recalled him at the same time of his youth and his country, a double remembrance which makes a man smile at all ages. But stepping toward the antechamber and making a sign to D'Artagnan with his hand, as if to ask his permission to finish with others before he began with him, he called 3 times, with a louder voice each time, so that he ran through the intervening tones between the imperative accent and the angry accent. Athos, Porthos, Aramis! The 2 musketeers with whom we have already made acquaintance, and who answered to the last 2 of these 3 names, immediately quitted the group of which they had formed a part, and advanced toward the cabinet, the door of which closed after them as soon as they entered. Their appearance, although it was not quite at ease, excited by its carelessness, at once full of dignity and submission, the admiration of D'Artagnan, who beheld in these 2 men demigods, and in the leader of an Olympian Jupiter, armed with all his thunders. When the 2 musketeers had entered, when the door was closed behind them, when the buzzing murmur of the antechamber, to which the summons which had been made had doubtless furnished fresh food, had recommenced, when Monsieur de Tréville had 3 or 4 times paced in silence, and with a frowning brow, the whole length of his cabinet, passing each time before Porthos and Aramis, who were as upright and silent as if on parade, he stopped at once, full in front of them, and covering them from head to foot with an angry look. "Do you know what the king said to me?" cried he, "and that no longer ago than yesterday evening? Do you know, gentlemen?" "No," replied 2 musketeers after a moment of silence. "No, sir, we do not." "But I hope that you will do us the honor to tell us," added Aramis, in his politest tone, and with his most graceful bow. "He told me that he should henceforth recruit his musketeers from among the guards of Monseigneur the Cardinal." "The guards of the Cardinal? And why so?" asked Porthos warmly. "Because he plainly perceives that this piquet stands in need of being enlivened by a mixture of good wine." The 2 musketeers reddened to the whites of their eyes. D'Artagnan did not know where he was, and wished himself 100 feet underground. "Yes, yes," continued Monsieur de Tréville, growing warmer as he spoke. "And his Majesty was right, for upon my honor, it is true that the musketeers make but a miserable figure at the court. The cardinal related yesterday, while playing with the king, with an air of condolence very displeasing to me, that the day before yesterday those damned musketeers, those daredevils," he dwelt upon those words with an ironical tone still more displeasing to me, "those braggarts," added he, glancing at me with his tiger's eye, "had made a riot in the Rue des Férous in a cabaret, and that a party of his guards, I thought he was going to laugh in my face, had been forced to arrest the rioters. Morbleu! You must know something about it. Arrest the Musketeers? You were among them. You were. Don't deny it. You were recognized. And the cardinal named you. But it's all my fault. Yes, it's all my fault. Because it is myself who selects my men. You, Aramis. Why the devil did you ask me for a uniform when you would have been so much better as a cassock? And you, Porthos, do you only wear such a fine golden baldric to suspend a sword of straw from it? And Athos, I don't see Athos. Where is he? Ill. Very ill, say you? And of what malady? It is feared that he may have come with the smallpox, sir, replied Porthos, desirous of taking his turn in the conversation. And what is serious is that it will certainly spoil his face. The smallpox, that's a great story to tell me, Porthos. Sick of the smallpox at his age. No, but wounded without doubt. Killed, perhaps. Ah, if I knew. Splud. Messieurs Musketeers, I will not have this haunting of bad places, this quarreling in the streets, this sword play at the crossways, and above all, I will not have occasion given the cardinal's guards, who are brave, quiet, skillful men who never put themselves in a position to be arrested, and who, besides, never allow themselves to be arrested, to laugh at you. I am sure of it. They would prefer dying on the spot to being arrested or taking back a step. To save yourselves, to scamper away, to flee, that is good for the king's musketeers. Porthos and Aramis trembled with rage. They could willingly have strangled Monsieur de Treville if, at the bottom of all of this, they had not felt it was the great love he bore them which made him speak thus. They stamped upon the carpet with their feet. They bit their lips till the blood came, and grasped the hilts of their swords with all their might. All without had heard, as we have said, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis called and had guessed from Monsieur de Treville tone of voice that he was very angry about something. 10 curious heads were glued to the tapestry that became pale with fury, for their ears, closely applied to the door, did not lose a syllable of what he had said, while their mouths repeated as he went on the insulting expressions of the captain to all the people in the antechamber. And in an instant, from the door of the cabinet, the street gate, the whole hotel was boiling. Ah! The king's musketeers are arrested by the guards of the cardinal, are they? Continued Monsieur de Treville, as furious as heart and as his soldiers, but emphasizing his words and plunging them, one by one, to say, like so many blows of a stiletto, into the bosoms of his auditors. What, 6 of his eminence's guards arrest 6 of his majesty's musketeers? Morbleu! My part is taken. I will go straight to the Louvre. I will give in my resignation as captain of the king's musketeers to take a lieutenancy in the cardinal's guards. And if he refuses me, morbleu, I will turn abbé. At these words, the murmur without became an explosion. Nothing was to be heard but oaths and blasphemes. The morbleus and the sang-deux, the morts toutes les diables, crossed one another in the air. D'Artagnan looked for some tapestry behind which he might hide himself, and felt an immense inclination to crawl under the table. Well, my captain, said Porthos, quite beside himself, the truth is that we were 6 against 6, but we were not captured by fair means, and before we had time to draw our swords, 2 of our party were dead, and Athos grievously wounded, but very little better. For you know Athos. Well, captain, he endeavored twice to get up, and fell twice again. And we did not surrender. No, they dragged us away by force. On our way we escaped. As for Athos, they believed him to be dead, and left him very quiet on the field of battle, not thinking it worth the trouble to carry him away. That's the whole story. What the devil, Captain? One cannot win all one's battles. The great Pompey lost that of Pharsalia, and Francis I, who was, as I have heard, as good as other folks, nevertheless lost the battle of Pavia. And I have the honor of assuring you that I killed one of them with his own sword, said Aramis, for mine was broken at the first parry. Killed him, or poniarded him, sir, as is most agreeable to you. I did not know that, replied Monsieur de Treville. In a somewhat softened tone, the cardinal exaggerated, as I perceive. But I pray, sir, continued Aramis, who, seeing his captain become appeased, ventured to risk a prayer, do not say that Athos is wounded. He would be in despair if that should come to the ears of the king. And as the wound is very serious, seeing that after crossing the shoulder it penetrates into the chest, it is to be feared. At this instant the tapestry was raised, and a noble and handsome head, but frighteningly pale, appeared under the fringe. "Athos!" cried the two musketeers. "Athos!" repeated Monsieur de Treville himself. "You have sent for me, sir?" said Athos to Monsieur de Treville, in a feeble yet perfectly calm voice. "You have sent for me, as my comrades inform me, and I have hastened to receive your orders. I am here. What do you want with me?" And at these words, the musketeer, in irreproachable costume, belted as usual, with tolerably firm step, entered the chamber. Monsieur de Treville, moved to the bottom of his heart by this proof of courage, sprang toward him. "I was about to say to these gentlemen," added he, "that I forbid my musketeers to expose their lives needlessly, for brave men are very dear to the king, and the king knows that his musketeers are the bravest on earth. Your hand, Athos." And without waiting for the answer of the newcomer to the proof of affection, Monsieur de Treville seized his right hand and pressed it with all his might, without perceiving that Athos might be in his self-command, allowed a slight murmur of pain to escape him, and, if possible, grew paler than he might have been before. The door remained open, so strong was the excitement produced by the arrival of Athos, that whose wound, though kept as a secret, was known to all. A burst of satisfaction hailed the last words of the captain, and 2 or 3 heads, carried away by the enthusiasm of the moment, appeared through an opening at the tapestry. Monsieur de Treville was about to reprehend his breach of the rules of etiquette, when he felt the hand of Athos, who had rallied all his energies to contend against pain, at length, overcome by it, fell upon the floor as if he were dead. "A surgeon!" cried Monsieur de Treville. "Mine, the king's, the best surgeon. Oh, or as blood, my brave Athos will die." At the cries of Monsieur de Treville, the whole assemblage rushed into the chamber, he not thinking to shut the door against anyone, and all crowded round the wounded man. But all this eager attention might have been useless if the doctor, so loudly called for, had not chanced to be in the hotel. He pushed his way through the crowd, approached Athos, still insensible, and as all this noise and commotion inconvenienced him greatly, he required, as the first, the most urgent thing, that the musketeer should be carried into the adjoining chamber. Immediately, Monsieur de Treville opened and pointed the way to Porthos and Aramis, who bore their comrade in their arms. Behind this group walked the surgeon, and behind the surgeon the closed door. The cabinet of Monsieur de Treville, generally held so secret, became the annex of the antechamber. Everyone spoke, harangued, and vociferated, swearing, cursing, and consigning the cardinal and his guards to all the devils. An instant after Porthos and Aramis entered, the surgeon and M. de Treville alone remaining with the wounded. At length M. de Treville himself returned. The injured man had recovered his senses. The surgeon declared that the situation of the Musketeer had nothing in it to render his friends uneasy, his weakness having been purely and simply caused by loss of blood. Then M. de Treville made a sign with his hand, and all retired except for D'Artagnan, who did not forget that he had an audience, and, with the tenacity of a Gascon, remained in his place. When all had gone out of the door, and the door was closed behind them, M. de Treville, on turning round, found himself alone with the young man. The event which had occurred had in some degree broken the thread of his ideas. He inquired what was the will of his preserving visitor. D'Artagnan then repeated his name, and in an instant recovering all his remembrances of the present and the past, M. de Treville grasped the situation. "Pardon me, sir," said he, smiling. "Pardon me, my dear compatriot, but I had wholly forgotten you. But what help is there for it? A captain is nothing but a father of a family, charged with an even greater responsibility than the father of the ordinary family. Soldiers are big children, but, as I maintain, the orders of the king, and more particularly the orders of the cardinal, should be executed." D'Artagnan could not restrain a smile. By this smile, M. de Treville judged that he had not to deal with a fool, and, changing the conversation, came straight to the point. "I respected your father very much," he said. "What can I do for the son? Tell me quickly, my time is not my own." "Monsieur," said D'Artagnan, on quitting Tarbes and coming hither, "it was my intention to request of you, in remembrance of the friendship which you have not forgotten, the uniform of a musketeer. But after that all I have seen during the last 2 hours, I comprehend that such a favor is enormous, and tremble lest I should not merit it." "It is indeed a favor, young man," replied M. de Treville, "but it may not be so far beyond your hopes as you believe, or rather as you appear to believe. But His Majesty's decision is always necessary, and I inform you with regret that no one becomes a musketeer without the preliminary ordeal of several campaigns, certain brilliant actions, or a service of 2 years in some other regiment less favorable than ours." D'Artagnan bowed without replying, feeling his desire to don the musketeer's uniform vastly increased by the great difficulties which preceded it, the attainment of it. "But," continued M. de Treville, fixing upon his compatriot a look so piercing that he might have said he wished to read the thoughts of his heart, "on account of my old companion, your father, as I have said, I will do something for you. Young man, our recruits from Bern are not generally very rich, and I have no reason to think the matter have much changed in this respect since I left the province. I dare say you have not brought too large a stock of money with you." D'Artagnan drew himself up with a proud air which plainly said, "I ask alms of no man." "Oh, that's very well, young man," continued M. de Treville. "That's all very well. I know these airs. I myself came to Paris with 4 crowns in my pocket, and I would have fought with anyone who dared tell me I was not in a condition to purchase the Louvre." D'Artagnan bearing became still more imposing. Thanks to the sale of his horse, he commenced his career with 4 more crowns than Monsieur de Treville possessed at the commencement of his own. "You ought, I say then, to husband the means you have, however large the sum may be, but you ought to endeavor to perfect yourself in the exercises of becoming a gentleman. I will write a letter today to the director of the Royal Academy, and tomorrow he will admit you, without any expense to yourself. Do not refuse this little service. The best born and richest gentlemen sometimes solicit it without being able to obtain it. You will learn horsemanship, swordsmanship, in all its branches, and dancing. You will make some desirable acquaintances, and from time to time you can call upon me just to tell me how you are doing and to say whether I can be of any further service. D'Artagnan, stranger as he was to all the manners of the court, could not but perceive a little coldness in this reception. "Alas, sir," said he, "I cannot perceive how sadly I missed the letter of introduction which my father gave me to present to you." "I certainly am surprised," replied Monsieur de Treville, "that you should undertake so long a journey without that necessary passport, the sole resource of us poor Béarnese." "I had one, sir, and, thank God, such as I could wish," cried D'Artagnan, "but it was perfidiously stolen from me." He then related the adventure of Meung, described the unknown gentleman with the greatest minuteness, and of all with a warmth truthfulness that delighted Monsieur de Treville. "This is all very strange," said Monsieur de Treville, after meditating for a minute. "You mentioned my name, then, aloud?" "Yes, sir. I certainly committed that imprudence. But why should I have done otherwise? A name like yours must be as a buckler to me on my way. Judge if I should not put myself under its protection." Flattery was always at that period very current, and Monsieur de Treville loved incense as well as a king, even a cardinal. He could not refrain from a smile of visible satisfaction. But this smile soon disappeared, and returning to the adventure of Meung, "Tell me," he continued, "had not this gentleman a slight scar on his cheek?" "Yes, such a one as would be made by the grazing of a ball." "Was he not a fine-looking man?" "Yes." "Of lofty stature?" "Yes." "Of pale complexion and brown hair?" "Yes, yes, that is he. How is it, sir, that you are acquainted with this man? If I ever find him again, and I will find him, I swear, were it in hell." "He was waiting for a woman," continued Treville. "He departed immediately after having conversed for a minute with her whom he awaited." "You know not the subject of their conversation." "He gave her a box, told her not to open it except in London." "Was this woman English?" "He called her Milady." "It is he. It must be he," murmured Treville. "I believed him still at Brussels." "Oh, sir, if you know who this man is," cried D'Artagnan, "tell me who he is, and whence he is. I will then release you from all your promises, even of producing my admission into the Musketeers, for before everything I wish to avenge myself." "Beware, young man," cried Treville. "If you see him coming on one side of the street, pass by on the other. Do not cast yourself against such a rock. He would break you like glass." "That will not prevent me," replied D'Artagnan, "if ever I find him." "In the meantime," said Treville, "seek him not, if I have a right to advise you." All at once the captain stopped, as if struck by a sudden suspicion. This great hatred which the young traveler manifested so loudly for this man, who, a rather improbable thing, had stolen his father's letter from him, was there not some perfidy concealed under this hatred? Might not this young man be sent by his eminence? Might he not have come for the purpose of laying a snare for him? This pretended D'Artagnan was not an emissary of the cardinal, whom the cardinal sought to introduce into Treville's house, to place him near, to win his confidence, and afterward to ruin him, as he had done in 1,000 other instances. He fixed his eyes upon D'Artagnan even more earnestly than before. He was modestly and moderately reassured, however, by the aspect of that countenance full of astute intelligence and affected humility. I know he is a Gascon, reflected he, but he may be one of the cardinal as well as for me. Let us try him. My friend, said he slowly, I wish, as the son of an ancient friend, for I consider this story of the lost letter perfectly true, I wish, say, in order to repair the coldness you may have remarked in my reception of you, to discover to you the secrets of our policy. The king and the cardinal are the best of friends. Their apparent bickerings are only feints to deceive fools. I am not willing that a compatriot, a handsome cavalier, a brave youth, quite fit to make his way, should become the dupe of all these artifices, and fall into the snare after the example of so many others who have been ruined by it. Be assured that I am devoted to both of these all-powerful masters, and that my earnest endeavors have no other aim than the service of the king and also the cardinal, one of the most illustrious geniuses that France has ever produced. Now, young man, regulate your conduct accordingly, and if you entertain, whether from your father, your relations, or even from your instincts, any of these enmities which you constantly are breaking out against the cardinal, bid me adieu and let us separate. I will aid you in many ways, but without attaching you to my person. I hope that my frankness at least will make you a friend, that is, my friend. For you are not only young as a man, to whom I have hitherto spoken as I have done to you. Tréville said to himself, if the cardinal has set this young man upon me as a fox, he will certainly not have failed, he, who knows how bitterly I execrate him, to tell his spy that the best means of making his court to me is to rail at him. Therefore, in spite of all my protestations, if it be as I suspect, my cunning gossip will assure me that he holds his eminence in horror. It is, however, proved otherwise. D'Artagnan answered with the greatest simplicity. I came to Paris with exactly such intentions. My father advised me to stoop to nobody but the king, the cardinal, and yourself, whom he considered the first three personages of France. D'Artagnan added Monsieur de Tréville to the others, as may be perceived, but he thought this addition would do no harm. I have the greatest veneration for the cardinal, continued he, and the most profound respect for his actions. So much the better for me, sir, if you speak to me, as you say, with frankness, for then you will do me the favor to esteem the resemblance of your opinions. But if you have entertained any doubt, as naturally you may, I feel that I am ruining myself by speaking the truth, but I still trust you will not esteem me for less or less for it. And that is my object beyond all others. Monsieur de Tréville was surprised by the greatest degree. So much penetration, so much frankness created admiration, but did not entirely remove suspicions. The more this young man was superior to others, the more he was able to be dreaded if he meant to deceive him. Nevertheless, he pressed D'Artagnan's hand and said to him, You are an honest youth, but at present moment I can only do for you that which I just now offered. My hotel will always be open to you, hereafter being able to ask for me at all hours, and consequently to take advantage of all opportunities. You will probably obtain that which you desire. That is to say, replied D'Artagnan, that you will wait until I have proved myself worthy of it. Well, be assured, he added, with the familiarity of a Gascon, you shall not wait long. And he bowed in order to retire, and as if he considered the future in his own hands. But wait a minute, said Monsieur de Tréville, stopping him. I promised you a letter for the director of the academy. Are you too proud to accept it, young gentleman? No, sir, said D'Artagnan, and I will guard it so carefully that I will be sworn it shall arrive at his address, and woe be to him who shall attempt to take it from me." Monsieur de Treville smiled at this flourish, and leaving his young man compatriot in the embrasure of the window, where they had talked together, he seated himself at the table in order to write the promised letter of recommendation. While he was doing this, D'Artagnan, having no better employment, amused himself with beating a march upon the window, and with looking at the Musketeers, who went by, one after another, following them with his eyes until they disappeared. Monsieur de Treville, after having written the letter, sealed it, and, rising, approached the young man in order to give it to him. But at the very moment when D'Artagnan stretched out his hand to receive it, Monsieur de Treville was highly astonished to see his protégé make a sudden spring, become crimson with passion, and rushed from the cabinet, crying, "Sablood! He shall pass, not escape me this time." "And who?" asked Monsieur de Treville. "He, my thief," replied D'Artagnan. "Ah, the traitor!" and he disappeared. "The devil take the madman," murmured Monsieur de Treville, "unless," added he, "this is a cunning mode of escaping," seeing that he had failed in his purpose. Well, it's getting very interesting now. I hope you will excuse my very poor pronunciation of these several and sometimes many French words, phrases, and salutations, as I am not a speaker of French, but I do try. At any rate, I think we've now got to the meat of this meeting, where D'Artagnan has asked Monsieur de Treville, the captain of the Musketeers, for an entry into the Musketeers' Guard, and has been awarded the opportunity for some education and some trials to try and achieve this. I think this shall be a very interesting and very action-packed book, having now finished chapter 3, I believe. The next chapter will be chapter 4, and we will continue that tomorrow evening. I want to thank you all for joining me in the reading of The Three Musketeers and joining me this evening. Until tomorrow night, this has been Indiana Holmes, and love to you all. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.